This one, the TD-W106 double cassette deck dubbing, these are actually they're pretty well fabricated. This particular JVC is a entry level that, given the complement of components and the design, that this model is a mid-1980s to late 80s, possibly early 90s. Maybe early 90s, but I guarantee if it's early 90s, it's based on 80s engineering. The other thing that gives me a clue to its vintage is its piano, what we call piano key control. So the concept of touch controls or touch logic controls to control the mechanism did exist in the mid-80s. It actually existed in the late 70s. But entry-level decks, it's just code for inexpensive. It's a price point that all manufacturers like to produce products for because it's basically an introduction platform. But piano keys was very common, obviously, in the 60s and 70s before integrated controllers and integrated circuits became cost-effective enough, even for low-end models. Piano keys are great. They typically don't break. The worst you'll find is a little bend, like in this case, this record key is just dropped a little bit. It's not so much that the metal behind it is bent. I think it's just a little bit of broken plastic behind it. I've straightened out as much as I can, but that's about as far as I'm going to go with the old plastic. But the piano keys is a dead giveaway. The absence of Dolby C, this is a Dolby B deck only. There is no economy to include the circuitry for Dolby C on this. The user of this deck would not use that anyway. This is an entry level, and Dolby C is just one of those features that would just go unused forever on a deck like this. It would never be used. So its absence is not necessarily indicative of its vintage. It's more indicative of its class as an entry-level machine. Really only, what, 3, 4 knobs? Obviously your power switch, which is plugged in, so we turn it on. Your input switch, and I really think the design of this input switch is pretty clever. Input being either you're recording from line, so another device like a CD player, radio, or whatever. And then the other two inputs is obviously the in this setup, the right-hand deck, which is the play-only deck. And you have two choices, either normal speed or high speed, but basically the input is saying this deck rather than an external source, or if you're in line, an external source. The second big old toggle here, I like these giant toggles, also sort of indicative of 80s engineering, which is, it clearly tells you this is B deck only, which is the play record deck. So this has no function on the A deck, and this is tape type. Both Dolby and tape type have to do with, to keep it simple, something that goes on in the circuitry behind the scenes regarding what we call biasing. Biasing is how the tape is prepared when you're recording. With Dolby, that biasing specifically deals with tape hiss. Tape biasing, which is what this deals with, is for the different formulations of tape. And this biasing has to do with how the tape is prepared prior to the information being recorded on it. Tape decks have at minimum 2 heads. Depending on the arrangement, they could have 3, but basically the record head's job is to both erase the prior programming by essentially degaussing it, but that leaves the oxide particles in a random organization. So biasing for the tape formulation, a biasing signal will go on in a neutral pattern. So everything's in a line. And that way when the programming gets impressed upon it, the programming is more pure. So zap, nuke, align, then record. In chrome tapes, which is a different formulation of tape, obviously. It needs a different biasing algorithm, if you will, to align those particles. And the same thing with metal tapes. You might be saying chrome metal isn't chroma metal. Well, yes, it is. Chrome is chromium. So it's basically normal tape with chrome components to it, where metal is, well, more metal, a lot more metal. Metal tape, actually almost pure metal. A lot more metal, a lot stronger biasing is required to neutral the magnetic material. Everybody used normal, and mass-produced commercial tapes were done in normal. But you could buy chrome and metal tapes yourself and do dubbing or recording, in which case you would have to set, or on more expensive decks, that would be sensed by the body of the tape cartridge, and it would set the biasing up for you. But on a deck like this, a low-end deck, those feelers or sensors are not there. So if you're going to record on metal or chromium, you have to set that manually, both for record and during playback, or it's just not going to sound right. The only knob is record volume, and record volume only works for recording from line. So I found a video of a guy who's like, I don't know why this doesn't work when you're dubbing. Because you're dubbing. Dubbing means a copy of, not a modified copy of. That's a completely different thing. You would leave this deck, go out to a mixer, effects, yada yada, whatever, do your effects, come back. That's not dubbing. That's actually engineering. So, of course, this isn't going to work in the dub mode. Dub means make an exact copy of, and that means an exact copy of the volume as well. Duh. Other than that, you have your mechanical counter, very classic of the, well, since the advent of cassettes in the 1964, or whenever they start putting counters on, which was probably only a year or two after that. This is really just a gimmick. It doesn't really have any actual purpose. And it has a purpose, but the majority of consumers don't use it. So it's a balance between, does it have a purpose, and how much of the market actually uses it for its purpose. You'll probably find that all counters, mechanical or digital, are basically just a gimmick. Digital counters are more accurate and cooler to look at, certainly a cool sales feature. But again, they don't really offer much, except if your deck does indexing. Small percentage of the market that would ever do that. It gives you some idea of where you are on the tape, and that it's more often, especially mechanical counter, the most utility of a mechanical counter for the average user is actually just to tell you whether or not the tape is moving. And this counter only works on deck B anyway, which is the record play deck. But then there's no indexing feature, so that makes sense, because that really is the only purpose. So I use it to determine whether I can, if I can't see the tape. On this one, it's not too bad. You can actually see the spindles even in low light. So what have you got? Besides power button, you've got 4 knobs and, 5 controls. And then you have your standard tape controls, which if you're looking at this, you're probably already familiar. So very basic. Record, play, rewind, fast forward. In this case, stop, eject. It's not on the end, but pause is on the end. I'm going to talk about that in a second, why that is. And on the play deck, you have just play, fast, rewind, fast forward, and stop, eject. In this design, the A deck is on the right. The vast majority would be on the left. There is a reason why they did it this way. Again, I'll get to that in a second when we talk about the restoration of this, but I understand why it's on the right on this deck. But the A play deck is intended for that utility use of everyday listening to cassettes, not necessarily the record play deck. Why burn that deck down in terms of hours used? It won't be there when you need it for record. The layout of the ergonomics of it are actually pretty good for an entry level deck. It's very simple to use, not at all intimidating, just the basics. The mechanical mechanism is a very simple design. We'll take a quick peek at that. It is entry level, utilitarian. It is definitely not on the high end, but then you get what you pay for. Getting what you're paying for is actually pretty damn good. I've already done the basic service to one depth or another. Being that this was a basic deck, the external exam, yes, it was dirty and cruddy on the outside. The internal exam was almost as spotless as you see it here. Obviously, I've cleaned it up, but it was virtually dust-free. This mechanism is a unified mechanism between the two decks. And that would not be unusual, and actually would be expected to be seen on an entry-level class machine. The unified mechanism, they're actually two separate mechanisms, but they're joined physically together, screwed together as one platform. You can take it out in one piece, but then you can further separate it if you're going to do a service like I did. I actually separated the two halves to service pretty much every point. It's driven only by one motor. So the expensive higher end decks that I have back there are actually using independent motors. This one only has one motor, period, for all functions. So that's one motor to drive both capstans. It is not auto reversing, so that's just two capstans. But it's also using the same motor to drive the spindle mechanism, which is fast forward, reverse, and take up on play. So there are just 4 belts, one belt each coming off the main motor for the capstans, and then one belt each coming off the capstan, which has a pulley, to the idler setup for fast forward, rewind, and take up. The upside on that is a very simple mechanism, and once you get it apart, very simple to service. And in fact, this is probably 35 plus years old. Should last another 35 years before somebody needs to go in there and tear it down again. Each deck has 2 mini leaf switches to signal to the board what mode the deck is in. Obviously, the motor control and the head wires coming off for playback and record, playback of both decks and record and playback of the other deck. Hopefully I said that right. Playback of both decks and playback record of one deck. Yeah, I said that right. All of the E-caps look great, and generally the signal E-caps, those rarely go bad. Just because, and the reason for that, they can still go bad due to age and drying out, but it's typically not really a problem because they're not under heavy stress, electrical stress. They typically go bad, or typically don't ever go bad, I should say. The only E-caps that ever actually can become a problem are your bigger ones, which you'll find typically located near a transistor that's obviously bigger and usually heat with a heat sink. These bigger caps have to do with power filtering, so they filter the power, they smooth the DC and regulate that DC for the balance of the circuit. So pretty simple layout. This board seems to check out at this point. To disassemble this is basically a complete teardown of the chassis. That's just the way it's put together. So you'll see this crossbar here. If I was to take this bottom off, the front and the back would flop around. They're only being connected by that crossbar. So the bottom is integral to the structure of the entire unit, as is the back, front, and crossbar. Putting it together absolutely requires what I call order of operations, or you're going to end up redoing assemblies because you forgot this step that really needed to come before that step, and yada yada yada. You get that set right, let me get that set, let me get this set right, and then you can finally lock it in. But the record switch, which is a large slide switch, typical of the era, and it's actuated mechanically by this deck with a pawl that hits that. When you hit record, that pawl pushes down and puts this switch in its opposite orientation, changing the function of this board from playback to record. Beautiful design for the utilitarian nature and the price point and the market that it was aimed at. I'm looking, I just happened to spot on this main board 1992. That could just be a coinkydink, but it might also be the year, which would certainly fall in line with early 90s vintage. So the question, does it work? So after baselining, both decks exhibited the same problem. They had capstan motor and actually played. So they had pinch roller, and the pinch roller was in good enough condition to play without any noticeable WF or wow and flutter. If you don't know what that is, if you have noticeable wow and flutter, you'll know what it is. If you don't know what it is and you don't have a problem with it, ignorance is bliss. But neither had the idlers. So immediately, belt. Counter belt did not move. The mechanicals all worked. In other words, all the buttons pushed. There was no undue resistance. Pleased to see that both doors actually work, and actually work pretty well. And that is not always the case on 35-plus-year-old machines. It does have this markings of age and use. Obviously, these can't really be tested until it's serviced other than power on. So what's going on? So opening it up, and sure enough, the drive belts for the capstans were in place, but they were stretched, which is common. And the belts driving the spindles here both were off, and I'm happy to say had not reached the level of gummy, because that is a lot of time to clean that mess up. The counter belt, just it was in perfect condition, not gummy, not old, not stretched at all. In this case, this belt actually looked new. If you handed it to me, you probably would have fooled me. I wouldn't maybe say new, but I would say newer. Certainly not ready for replacement. So we didn't do that. You can't really reference these machines anymore. They don't build reference tapes anymore. And even if you can buy a reference tape, it's 40 years old, so it's worthless. So reference means reference. Referenced to what? So buying, a reference tape made by some guy at home in his own world, is it worth $35? But no, that's what it would cost for an actual MRL reference tape back when you could get those, Magnetic Research Labs. Would I pay $10 for a reference tape made by somebody who, made it at home? I'd pay $10-12 for it, knowing that it's better than nothing. Otherwise, we shoot all the pots and the trimmers with deoxit fader, because deoxit is capillary and it will work its way in there. And whenever we can, we always default the way the factory set it up. That's just our personal way of doing it, because there's no better calibration on any given deck 40 years later than the way the factory set it up. If we are tweaking anything, that in this case, the speed control, another great design, is right here, top side of the board. High speed and normal speed, right here, top side, 6 screws, anybody can do it, and you can tweak the speed to this deck yourself. I use metal because I live dangerously, but use non-metallic and just tweak it to your own reference. Remember, reference to what? Just because I set this up, and I did have to tweak that, so I've tweaked it by my ear. I can tell, because I've done it so many times, that when the pitch is as close as you're going to get it to anybody else's reference, without actually having a legitimate reference tape. Everybody's hearing is different, pitch is different. Tweak to your own taste. So once we got it all done, we always deox all the controls, all the switches, Get even the jacks, we deox it all because it's oxidized by 45 years. When we go to what we call our initial test, which is after the basic service, what we can do, we'll put it through a sort of a semi-burn test or an initial function test to see what the differences are between our original baseline and what we hope now is a new baseline that's much improved. And what we got is beautiful playing decks, beautiful controls. They're mechanical. They're as good as they're ever going to be. Play, when you push on play, you're not just pushing one little lever to something. You're doing that, but you're also pushing an entire platform up, including the pinch roller, against the tape. So it's normal to use more pressure to put the deck into play mode. And in record mode, again, the same thing. Not only are you pushing a platform, but when you push the record button, you're now pushing that, remember, that rotary pawl that then pushes against that spring-loaded switch. So you have even more pressure going into record, perfectly normal for piano key style. We felt this was operating normally, very good. You know, I can't say like new, but you know, what does like new? It's a reference, subjective, but I would say as intended, right? All the functions here in play all worked. Our counter worked. Our LEDs worked very well. So this one was actually, what it's playing now is recorded programming that I actually recorded on this deck as part of the record function. So this deck mechanically all works fine. Play works fine. Record works fine. It's looking very, very good. Controls are quiet. When I did record, the volume level online, which it only works online, was there. It worked beautifully. High and low or normal and high speed dub work. So when I did a dub test and just switch between low and high and the speed change. You can do that in real time if you want to. Everything seems to be working fine. So this is a dubbing deck and will work to dub just fine. The synchronous start feature, this is how this was designed to work. I'm going to put this into record mode and hit pause. Actually, I would have done that. I was going to make an exact dupe. I would hit pause first and make sure they're both rewound. And then put it in play and record mode, which I can see now I'm in record mode. Set my counter if I care. The setup is at normal, and I'm going to do normal dub, normal speed, and you know, do Dolby D. And then how this is supposed to work for synchronous start is that's what it means. Start them both at exactly the same time. Remember what I said earlier, why is this on the right side? There's pretty clever mechanics here on JVC's part. The reason this is on the right side is because what's next to this play button? This pause button. So if I'm going to hit play, synchronous start in JVC's design here is if I push play on this, I need to turn off pause on this. Thus, you get synchronous start. That's what I presumed, not only because there's lines telling me that's what to do, but I thought, how odd, they're in opposite positions, so how is this supposed to work? So the way that this should work is when I hit play, pause should get tripped off by my action of pushing play. That means there's a connection between the two decks. That's why the play deck is on the right, because there's obviously a pawl that gets tripped when I push play, that if this is in pause mode, it'll trip it off. Continuous play does the same thing, but you're not in record mode. So you can put in two tapes, set this one, play, pause, play from this one, and when this reaches end of tape, the end of tape mechanism will set that pawl and release the pause on this one, causing this one to start. Because there's obviously a pawl connection between the two. When I say pawl, P-A-W-L, just think paw, like your cat pawing at you, but we call it a pawl. So the only other issue then is that the view meter was pegged only when I was in dub mode. And you can see that the meter is pegged here. So the natural question is, does that actually affect the audio in dubbing? And the answer is no, it does not. And the reason that I know that it doesn't actually affect the recording, let me fast forward a tad, is because on our dubbed side, we do in fact get the audio and at the same frequency of the original, and the audio is there. It's hard for me to believe that would be by design, but it doesn't affect anything. It just is unusual, but it doesn't affect the ability of the deck to function. Last note on this, continuous play is a bit of a I'm going to say misnomer. It's not really continuous play the way that we would think of it. This is not an auto-reversing deck. In an auto-reversing deck, continuous play means just that. Play this side, A, B, then play this side, A, B, and play this side, A, and keep going, keep going. Little variation. There is some variation between manufacturers as to what continuous play means. More often, play this side A, this side B, this side A, this side B, and then stop. These are all just different implementations, minor changes. But continuous play means both sides of both wells. It's not auto-reversing. So continuous play in their setup is play side, whatever side you're on here, and then trip off the pause button because you've set that in advance, and play whatever side of this tape here. So you're really only getting one side of both tapes. It's really a relay play. It's relay from this deck to this deck would be more accurate than continuous, which most people would think at least continue playing both tapes the same way. Aside from the idiosyncrasies of time and age, I'm happy to report auto stop actually works on rewind and fast forward on both decks as well as play.
It happened on the strip where the road is wide. Two cool shorts